this is actually something we saw almost a year ago, about 9 months ago, maybe 10 months ago now, at PAX East in 2014. And it was a game that the designers were actually there demoing. Luis Lugo and Miguel Lugo. They were showing it in the back corner of the board gaming room, and we didn't actually get a chance to play it at the time. They had a lot of people playing, which was awesome because it means there was interest in the game, and it just scheduling wise it didn't work out. But the guys reached out to me a few months later with when the game was actually finished, and they were ready to send a copy, and they sent us a copy that we were able to get to the table. And so I played through it a couple times, and for a game that I would never have heard of otherwise, if I hadn't met these guys at PAX East, it's not a game in major distribution. It's not a game that was at one of the major conventions. It's just something that kind of appeared before me. I was actually very impressed in a number of ways by the way the game plays. And just real quick, I'll just run you through how it works. It's essentially a one-on-one game, although you can play 3 or 4 players. I think it's generally designed to be a 2-player game, much like Summoner Wars. There is a board on which you'll place all of the cards for your characters that you draw. And at the beginning of the game, you're going to draw 6 characters that will go on that board. If you play fewer players, it comes out to the same number of total characters, but it's they'll be divided up differently among the players. The idea of the game is that each of these characters has certain abilities based on dice rolls that you're going to make, and they also have certain directions in which they can attack, which are marked on the card. There are 8 different arrows on each character card, and some of them are grayed out and some of them are pink, and based on the ones that are pink or blue, which means that they're active, those are action points you can actually use. It means you can attack the characters in those directions. So it means positioning and movement is important at all times. Each of these characters also has a defense value. So that's, when somebody attacks you, it'll determine how much you subtract from whatever they roll. And then you have HP, which is your total health points. And then if they hit you, how much they subtract against that. There's a basic attack value in the top left corner. That's the number you have to roll every time you use that character to hit somebody. And then there are special attacks, assist skills, and defense skills. 3 additional numbers that'll appear at the bottom of the card. Not every card has all those numbers, but some of them have different numbers. And those will allow you to do different things, either performing an additional attack when you go after somebody, or rolling for defense if somebody tries to hit you, or helping another character on the field based on your dice rolls. And you're going to roll 2 dice every time. So most of these numbers are between 5 and 8, upwards of 9. So the actual rolls will depend, the basic attack is going to be on the slightly easier end of things if it's a 5, for example. The odds are that you will hit that 5, but you're not going to hit it every time. Much like Summoner Wars, the odds will be in your favor in certain instances, but you're still rolling dice, so there are situations in which you will miss. And then the more advanced abilities, like the defense skills and the assist skills, those are a little bit harder. They're usually around 8 or 9, and those are ones you're going to miss more often than you hit, but if you hit them, you're going to be able to defend against attacks, or help out other characters, or move your characters around the board in situations which you wouldn't normally be able to do. The game has 2 phases, and it has to do with how many characters are on the board at the time. So the board itself, which is actually really nice, usually for a game like this, you'd expect a player mat or nothing, and it comes with a full board that folds out, and you can move your cards around it, like Summoner Wars. And when you start the game, you use the full board, and once you reach a certain number of cards, you kind of contract the board and put them all in this 3x3 space. So it actually makes it so people can't kind of dodge around. So yeah, it is pretty neat. So it keeps it from ever getting to the point where it doesn't drag out for that reason. When I opened it up and we played it for the first time, the time frame on it said, I think 30 or 40 minutes. And the speed at which we initially started chipping away at hit points was relatively slow, And I thought, like, there's no way this game will be over that quickly. And then it kind of snowballed and ended very quickly, but not in a way that, like, one side kind of steamrolled the other. It was just the game contracts as you advance, and you don't really have a choice but to go after each other. You know, defensive play is rarely an option unless that's one of the leaders you pull. The game itself, actually, despite my initial impressions, actually seemed fairly well balanced. The only couple problems I had with it were the rules were kind of hard to follow. The rule book that came with the game, and I do have a production copy of the game that they sent me. It was, I had to read it 2 or 3 times. I referenced it a couple times as we played. It wasn't really laid out in a way that guided me through the game. So it could use some revision. And the artwork, in some instances, the characters kind of popped off the cards a little bit. That was more interesting. In other instances, not so much. And it really depended on if you were dealing with like a leader, which was more of a personality, or a warrior, which is kind of more of the generic characters like fencers or Doombat or Bazooka Soldier. They seemed kind of random. Thematically, there wasn't a whole lot of anything crossing over. And I think the theme of the game at Super Fantasy Rumble is just pulling from all aspects of fantasy games. But in that attempt, it doesn't really tie things together in any way. And then the artwork seems kind of random and not always the same quality in each piece. It doesn't mean it's bad. I don't necessarily have a problem with it. And I do really like the graphic design. The font is nice, and the way the colors play is nice. It makes the game easier to play. But there are some instances where it's not as strong as others. But the most important thing about this game is that the game itself, the core mechanics, are interesting. It is tightly balanced. Both sides have an equal opportunity. There is no like single race or certain deck that's going to do better if you optimize. There's enough randomness that, like Summoner Wars, anybody has a chance to win. And at the same time, strategy is very important because movement and your ability to move your characters on the board with the dash, slide, and castling abilities is very important and will become a big part of how you play. So I am actually quite impressed, and it's definitely a play. And if you are interested in a 2-player game that can kind of scale to 4 players, and the 4-player game, by the way, doesn't use like 2 boards like Summoner Wars. It plays on the same board. You just use less characters each and take turns. So the game doesn't actually get longer because of that, which is an awesome thing because Summoner Wars gets very long with 4 players. If you're interested in a game like that, it could be a buy for you. So I would check that out. To my knowledge, it's only on their website right now. You can take a look and see where they're selling it. But it's worth checking out if you see it at a game store, or if you anybody you know has it and you want to give it a shot. I would definitely give it a go. I had fun with it.
Yeah, I like to see that they actually thought about gaming and how a lot of other games play out, and to actually have the board shrink together. What an obvious but such a smart idea.
Yeah, I mean, it was, and when I read the rule, to me, I was like, well, of course you'd do that, because then people can't hide in the corner. You know, by default, the board is 4x4, and when you put out your 12 characters, of course that makes sense because it fills up the board. But once you've killed off half of those characters, you could kind of just keep dodging around and avoiding each other. And you get that really long end game that just drives everybody crazy, especially if one person's winning like 4-2. By contracting it down to 3x3, it makes it so the game doesn't lose any pace. Even though you have to stop the game, pick up all the cards, and put them back down, you don't lose the momentum that you had. You really feel like you would, and you don't. So it works really well in that way, and it's a smart move. I'm glad that they saw that and made that move in the game.